All right, everybody. I'm going to try to get this show on the road. This is a first time, so I may have the tech totally hosed. I think I've sent out invitations so you can join me live, but you know what? We're going to walk through this and I'll record it. And if it doesn't quite work the way it's supposed to work, we'll fix it by the next time. So I'm going to spend about the next 30 or 40 minutes walking you through Cassidy Kincaid's Charleston. And of course, Charleston, let me back up and say that Cassidy Kincaid is the main character in Trifles and Folly. And Trifles and Folly is set in Charleston, South Carolina, which is historic and haunted. And in my retelling of the world, it is protected by a nearly 600-year-old vampire named Soren and his allies who help keep the world safe from supernatural threats. And a key piece of his alliance, which is the organization of mortals and immortals that get rid of bad supernatural players and keep the world safe from those supernatural threats, has been Cassidy's ancestors all the way back to the founding of Charleston, which goes back to almost 350 years. And so her ancestors, all of whom have had some kind of psychic gift, particularly psychometry, which is the ability to read the history and magic of objects by touching them, own Trifles and Folly, which is a antique and curio shop that gets dangerous, haunted, and cursed magical items off the market and out of the wrong hands. So we have a number of novels. I think we're on 4 or 5 novels so far, and 2 very thick collections of short stories and novellas. And of course, all of my urban fantasy series as Gail and Morgan cross over. And all of the characters know each other, and they show up in each other's books. And in fact, Unholy, which is the 5th Witchbane book under my Morgan Bryce name, takes place in Charleston, and Cassidy and her friends are a major part of that plot. So I thought it would be kind of nice to take you to Charleston, and since none of us can leave home right now, Google Earth is doing the heavy lifting for me. So we're starting from, bird's eye view, just to give you an idea in case you didn't realize that Charleston is actually on a peninsula between rivers. It's not actually opening into the ocean proper. It opens into a harbor. And so this peninsula right here, and I'm going to zoom in, is Charleston itself. And you can see some of the markers for places that we will visit today and that we visited in the past in the books. So you can see Magnolia Cemetery, which plays a key role in Vendetta. You can also see the Old Charleston Jail, which we visited in the books, and White Point Garden, which is where Cassidy runs into the Red Cap, and also where Dante and Colt take care of the evil necromancer in Among the Shoals Forever. And so you've got some key pieces right there. Now I'm going to zoom back out a little bit because we're also going to go to Magnolia Plantation in this little tour, in Drayton Hall. Drayton Hall served as my inspiration for the decaying manor house in Unholy. And here you have the angel oak tree down here on John's Island, a little bit out of town. That's the tree that's on the cover of Vendetta, of course, plays an important part in that book. And then if we go out this direction toward Ravenel and Jericho, we get into some of the small towns that are mentioned also in Unholy. So that gives you a bit of a bird's eye view. And now let's go to Charleston and see the sights. So here we are, zooming in. Close your eyes if you get vertigo, because we're going to be a little swoopy here. And we're going to see some pretty pictures. This is the Battery, not Battery Row. That's in New York. This is the Battery, and Battery is actually named for the seawall there you can see that helps keep the harbor in the harbor. Old, beautiful antebellum homes that have withstood many, many hurricanes and storms. And here we get a little more of a close-up on some of that architecture. Charleston just has amazing architecture. Google Earth is sort of weird. Depending on the device you're looking at it, you can see the whole fountain, or as you can see right here, the bottom of the fountain, but Charleston has a very famous pineapple-topped fountain in one of its major gardens that shows up on all the postcards. U.S. Customs House has been there for a long time. It is, I think it's one of the ones that used to front onto the waterfront, but because the harbor has become so built up, back in the 1700s, the boats dumped their ballast, which were largely stones, in the harbor because there was no point in taking it back with them. Well, over time that accumulated and it built the land out a number of feet from where it used to be. And I believe the Customs House might be one of the ones where it used to, once upon a time, front on the water, and now it doesn't by several blocks. Of course, there is a working harbor and a naval base there, so you will get some warships. There's the Ravenel Bridge, which is a landmark. I haven't used it yet in the books, but it is quite a pretty bridge. Now, this is from Magnolia Plantation, which is a gorgeous, it has some of the largest collection of azaleas in the country, and it's got a lot of cypress, and you can see the Spanish moss there. It's just a beautiful sculpture garden. The house itself we'll see a little bit of. The house, as houses go, is not tremendously remarkable, but the grounds are truly gorgeous. Now here you get one of those rainbow row kind of houses with the multicolors, and legend has it that a lot of the wealth in Charleston came from sea captains. A lot of the sea captains were doing that triangle trade with the Caribbean, and they saw these wonderful shell pink and blue and green, these vibrant colors that were used in the Caribbean. And they brought them home to their homes here in the United States. And of course, we also see the sideways construction on this house. You can see the door in the fence, which is just behind the back of that carriage. And so this is a very, very fancy single house. Called single house because one side of it, the narrow side faces the street, and a wall keeps people from being able to come in and just go up and go to the front porch. And this was to be able to give the residents more privacy. Here we have some of the pretty hues in Rainbow Row. And here we have a first shot of the angel oak. It's about a 500-year-old live oak tree, and you can totally imagine gods and loas and supernatural creatures up in its branches, as we had in the final battle in Vendetta. It is truly a magnificent tree. Some places will try to tell you it's 1,400 years old, but the most authoritative sites and the gift shop and visitor center itself say 500, which is still pretty darn old. That's Fort Sumter. The first place that shots were fired in the American Civil War. It's off the battery there. You can see it across Charleston Harbor. And some more of Charleston's gorgeous architecture, and we'll skip the museum exhibits. This is Drayton Hall. We'll see it a little more coming up in a bit. The interesting thing here is that the owners of Drayton Hall were really annoyed that they didn't win the Civil War. So they packed up and left for Europe. And not only that, but they were so annoyed that they not only left their mansion to ruin, and of course, everybody who depended on them, but they also sold off rights for phosphorus mining across all of their yards and everything. So in the 1920s, the early teens and 20s, the whole place was dug up for phosphorus mining, and it was only much later that the yards were restored. But the house has never been restored other than to just keep up with breakage and keep it structurally sound. So this is not the inside of Drayton Hall, because Drayton Hall has been left to rot for 200 years, 150 years, and we'll see some close-up pictures of it later. This is from the sculpture garden in Magnolia Gardens. It's just a beautiful place to wander down along the river. And there is the house for Magnolia Gardens. Certainly a beautiful house, not exactly what you're thinking of if your idea of a Southern mansion comes from Gone with the Wind. We're back to Drayton House. And this is another monument, I believe, at Magnolia Plantation. So since the focus here is on Deadly Curiosities, Cassidy often goes to the Charleston City Market. Now here you see it, and I'm going to stop it, try to stop it from spinning. but it's got a central location there with a building at one end that is completely enclosed, and then the rest of it, which stretches, as you can see, for several blocks, is open on the sides and has a lot of tables that people set up in the morning, break down in the evening. But that enclosed part at the very end, everything inside there is more like an actual permanent shop. And there are also some nice snack bars and restaurants. So here we are inside that permanent section. You can see it's got a little bit of everything. It's got some wonderful bakeries and gift items. It really is a good place to eat. Here it's done up for Christmas. All kinds of candies and good snacks, not to mention some terrific freeze-dried okra as a snack, if you can get into that. Sweetgrass baskets. Mrs. Teller and her daughter Nyella weave sweetgrass. This is a legacy craft that is handed down from generation to generation. It comes from the Gullah people, the Gullah Geechee people, who were escaped and freed slaves who fled into some of the island areas and have their own very vibrant culture and language. Very difficult to do, takes a lifetime to master. The baskets are beautiful and also very, very expensive. But when we're talking about Mrs. Teller and her baskets, which of course in the books, Mrs. Teller is a weaver witch, so she can weave magic into her baskets as well. This is what we're talking about. And they not only are amazing, and each weaver has his or her own different forms and shapes and patterns, but they also smell amazing too, because it's not called sweetgrass for nothing. You can get a bar in there, lots of candy, lots of snacks, more sweetgrass, some of the crafts. Go through this part, much as I hate to pass by the fudge, not what we're here for, but wanted to give you a taste of. Now, here we are in the outside area, and you can see how the side walls are open to the air, and then the two ends are open, but you do at least have a solid roof, and on warm days, you've got overhead fans. It's just a wonderful place to look for all kinds of crafts, jewelry, pottery, soap, pretty much anything you'd want to find. Now, here we are, King Street. Trifles and Folly is situated on King Street, which is one of the major mercantile areas, major shopping center areas in Charleston. And we'll just take a quick look at some of the architecture here. Of course, some of those single houses again. The horse-drawn carriages are all over Charleston, and they're really wonderful. You get some of the really old houses and some of the more historic but newer houses and parks. Gorgeous, gorgeous city. So we get a look at some of the more modern aspects of King Street, but that's where Cassidy's shop is located. Make a quick visit to Rainbow Row, and Rainbow Row, of course, has those multicolored homes, and you can see now why we call it Rainbow Row. Many of the families that live in these, not all, but many, have passed them down from generation to generation. Of course, it's pretty expensive real estate, just like the homes on the Battery, but you got to love those vivid colors, and they stand out so starkly. And here we have cobblestone streets, which are still pretty common in parts of Charleston. And you get an idea of some of those wonderful colors that just add a lot of vibrancy to the city. Now, Cassidy is friends with the curator of the museum in Deadly Curiosities. It's not called the Charleston Museum in the book because I don't like to use names for actual places if they're not landmarks or government owned. But that gives me a little more leeway to do what I want with them, like have them be majorly haunted or blow things up in the basement. But the Charleston Museum, if you are ever in Charleston, is a wonderful place to, yes, that is a whale. Charleston had some whaling history, but it not only has some traveling exhibits, but it takes you through the entire history of Charleston, both free and enslaved people, going back to prehistoric periods and through all of the different eras. Here we have a, pardon me, a replica of the Hunley, which was one of the very first submarines back during the Civil War. It ran one mission, blew up the ship that it was intended to deliver a payload to, and then the concussion from the explosion threw the Hunley off course, and unfortunately it sank and all men aboard were killed. It was lost for quite a long time, over a century. It was finally rediscovered, brought to the surface, and there is a Hunley museum out in the Naval Yard that has the actual Hunley and pardon me, preserves the history of how it was reclaimed and how they dealt with the preservation. Old Charleston Jail. Now this shows up also in Deadly Curiosities. And this is a jail that was used in colonial times. It was used as a prisoner of war holding place during the Civil War. And it was used between for criminals and all manner of nefarious people. Lavinia Fisher, one of the most notorious serial killers, she and her husband ran a boarding house, an inn where they would kill their customers and drop the bodies into a lime pit. She was finally caught. Of course, in my universe, it's Soren, the vampire who helped catch her way back in the day. But a lot of very gruesome and dark history around the jail. And so needless to say, it's also one of the most haunted places in Charleston. Last time I was there, you know, it has been open for tours. And that's it's only open to the public with tours. And then it was sold to a College of Art and Design, and that didn't work out. So the last time I was in Charleston, it was being sold to a developer who was going to turn it into condos. I really can't quite imagine that, because it has been one of the most haunted places in Charleston for centuries, you know, for decades. But yeah, can't wait to see how that one works out. It really has that fortress feeling, doesn't it? And you know, I was on several tours and I was taking pictures, and you can think what you want to of orbs, you know, the little light flashes. Didn't get orbs in almost any other pictures. But when I was taking pictures from the rear of the old jail in the area where they used to have the gallows, it looked like it was snowing. There were so many orbs. Orbs are supposed to be spirits or ghosts or ghostly energy. So, you know, you make up your mind on what you believe on that. Interestingly enough, right across from the jail is there are a couple of blocks that have been made into low-income housing. Guess what the land was used for before it was turned into low-income housing? That's right. It was the paupers cemetery, where they buried old people over the years that they hanged in the backyard of the old jail. So again, I'm not sure that's working out real well for anybody. And you can see it, you know, it really doesn't need to be embellished fictional. This place looks creepy as hell, and it is when you're in there. I'm not even personally really sensitive to psychic stuff, much as I love to write about it. But man, I would not go in there alone at night for all the money in the world. Now here you get an idea of what it looks like. So Drayton Hall, this was used as the idea behind the family home in Unholy, where Beckford Pennington was disowning his family heritage. Here you can see, this is what it looks like when you let a house remain unheated and unair conditioned for 150 some years and just make sure that the windows aren't broken and that you don't have an infestation of animals or bugs or, you know, vagrants, and that you keep the pipes from freezing and those kinds of things. Other than that, other than just basic upkeep, it hasn't really been maintained. And so you can see that in the state of its decay. the lands have been restored around it. It does have beautiful grounds now. It's really a shame that it's been left to just molder, because you can see it's got some absolutely gorgeous features and some of the original glass. It is not anywhere near anything, so I think that's why it has been vandalized in the past. There have been thefts of things like some of the marble mantle pieces and some of the features, but it's been left remarkably intact, and I think it is because it is way out in the middle of nowhere. And some of the dependencies are still there. You can see this, I think, was one of the kitchen areas, and a well. But it was and it's right there on the river. And of course, that plays into the plot in Unholy. There you see it in maybe some better days. We're going to go to the angel oak tree now. And this is, of course, you got a quick look at it there. It is on the cover of Vendetta. And here we have there's the visitor center, which also shows up in the book. Let me go back to that other one. The sheer size of this tree is pretty amazing. It's a live oak tree. And for people unaccustomed to that species of tree, it is actually called live oak. That's not as opposed to dead oak. It's not an oak tree like you might be used to in northern climates. It is an oak tree. It's called live oak because oh my, I seem to have done everything except really be able to let people in. So let me try that for just a second. I'm going to just go ahead and video this, and we'll do better next time. So it's called live oak because it is not a deciduous tree. It doesn't lose its leaves in the winter. It is a form of evergreen, and the branches grow and touch the ground and come back up, and it is this marvelous sprawling thing that doesn't even look real. And it is so massive. You got an idea of the scale there with the people standing in front of it. You do often get moss and ferns and Spanish moss. There's a nice lizard for you. That's kind of an otherworldly picture there, but it does feel like something that should be made up in a fantasy novel. And especially like you see here, if there's a mist, if it's just a glowing moment, you've got, you definitely feel like you've stepped into another world. Magnolia Plantation and Gardens. Notable for its many, many species of azaleas and rhododendron. If you've been watching some of the pictures that I post, it also has the Chinese, I think the Chinese New Year celebration floats and sculptures that are there. We got to see it last year, no, year before last. It is a very tranquil, beautiful place because of the gardens. And you also have a lot of the bald cypress, which is a very odd tree if you're not familiar with it, and the way it grows and the way its roots come up like knobs. And here we are. There it is, set up for a banquet. But it's just a beautiful place to wander. I guess they have old car shows. And here you can see some of that Spanish moss. It has meandering trails and peacocks and all of the flowering shrubs and bushes, and nice little restaurant, alligators, because alligators are everywhere, and a sculpture garden, more alligators, as well as a marsh area. Seems to want to just show you the marsh instead of the pretty stuff. Well, sorry about that. Magnolia Cemetery is not anywhere close to Magnolia Plantation, but this is an old cemetery in Charleston, and it is plays an important role in the novel Vendetta. It's just, if you like cemeteries, and I'm a total cemetery groupie, Magnolia Cemetery is beautiful. It it is your quintessential deep Southern cemetery with the live oak and the Spanish moss, and it looks creepy. And there, you've got monuments from some of the wealthy, famous families in Charleston's history. Of course, there are Civil War casualties buried there. The crew of the Hunley were buried there, and they actually, because the ship had been lost for like 150 years before it was brought back up, and they were able to respectfully retrieve the bodies that were inside. They were the last Civil War combatants to be interred. And that happened in, I think, the 90s, 1990s. So here are some of, and like I said, it's creepy as hell in some places. There are some very odd and unusual grave markers, and this is definitely one of them. And of course, there are all kinds of legends and stories, but doesn't that look exactly like you'd expect a deep Southern haunted cemetery to look? I mean, really. And all kinds of markers, depending on what branch of service people were in, or whether or not they were firefighters or many other membership organizations. Here we have a pyramid, because who doesn't love having a pyramid in their historic cemetery? But it is also a beautiful place. And there's such a variety in stones and obelisks and markers. And you can see here, you know, looking across the marsh and some of the trees, there is a serenity to it and a beauty. And I'm just a cemetery junkie. So I've been on tours there. I love to just go wander. We've got some nice mausoleums, some interesting features. I believe that's the interment for the Hunley crew right there. And let's see, we are almost to our end here. White Point Gardens. This is right on the harbor in downtown Charleston. And as I said, it's played a part in a number of the different Deadly Curiosities short stories and novels. It is rumored to be built over a filled-in stretch of land that was largely filled in with shells from clams and mussels and oysters, and that is low enough and close enough to the harbor that when the tides come in and out, according to the stories, the water comes in and out of the fill that is beneath the land there. And so it is never completely land and it is never completely water. And therefore it is, you know, according to lore and legend, that is exactly the kind of place that traps spirits. So of course, this is where Charleston hanged its pirates back in the day. And that pretty much dooms them to hang around forever. And that was the point of the short story Among the Shoals Forever, because it was set right here, and necromancer thrown in, because why not? But as you can see, at least by daytime, without any red-cap fairies or necromancers or pirate ghosts running around, it's actually a very nice place to walk, take your dog. Charlestonians love taking their dogs around. Monuments galore, some more live oak. You could spend an entire week just looking at all the monuments on everything in Charleston. And here we have, again, some beautiful, beautiful homes. And you can see how they are all turned to the side from where what we would conventionally think should be the front door. And that's that single house architecture. And the porches in Charleston are referred to as a piazza. It's a Charlestonian thing. And the ceilings are often painted a very, very light shade of blue called haint blue. And in fact, I believe you can even get haint blue from Sherwin-Williams. Why is it haint blue, H-A-I-N-T? Well, that is regional phrasing for haunt, and it's said to repel ghosts, that shade of blue. Now, it's also said to repel bees and wasps, so take your pick. I kind of like the ghost version. You can see some of the beautiful homes that front onto the harbor and White Point Gardens, and some of the monuments for all of the wars. Of course, Charleston has always had a seagoing history. It also has a naval history with all of the incarnations of our Navy and all of the wars. And so, pirates and privateers, Blackbeard was, you know, there are tales about Blackbeard having been in Charleston. It was a major seaport. So there are a lot of monuments. And here you can see down along this end of the battery, looking out into the harbor. And of course, so many of these homes have their own stories and legends, and those horse-drawn carriage tour guides will be glad to tell you all of it. That's one of my favorite things to do. So we're going to end with Boone Hall Plantation. And again, more live oak. And here we have a house that actually was taken care of. Not all of these pieces are going to turn out to be original. I'm a history junkie, so I'm going to go through this and I'm going to look for all the weird things, but I'm also going to appreciate how pretty the architecture is, how interesting the furnishings are. And I'm always looking for those little pieces of authenticity that could be something that Cassidy and Teague handle in the store, where this shows up as a problematic item, either cursed, haunted, belong to somebody, something that adds that little bit of authenticity, where somebody who is knowledgeable about the history, the antiques, the objects, the time period go, oh yeah, you were paying attention. Here you have a recreation down in some of the servants area and the kitchen. Now, when they put the mannequins in these things, that creeps me the heck out, because you know, I can deal with real people in reenacting costumes. When they start putting the mannequins around, that creeps me out. And of course, I think that it is important to note that most, if not all, of the plantations are doing a much better job than they used to at acknowledging the horrific toll of slavery and the enslaved people who made the grandeur and fine living of those plantation owners possible, and their abysmal conditions, and the treatment and the servitude there. And that's been a big difference in more than a decade of visiting Charleston, is to see a lot of these plantations own up to that. And of course, many of them are rightfully no longer offering wedding venues because of the horrific history there. But they are starting to tell that story and tell it in a much more honest way about the conditions and the situation of the enslaved individuals and how it contributed to the fortunes of the plantation. So that's something that was a very important and missing piece of history at these tours, and it has been gradually added and beefed up, and so that is something that was long overdue. And of course, here we have some of the slave quarters, which were for multiple families, so you get an idea of how unpleasant it was. Vineyards, crops, some of their... Now, I have no idea how old some of these pictures are. I didn't load them. They're not my pictures. This is what's on Google Earth. So I am sharing Google Earth's interpretation. I don't even know if they have any of those venues like we saw. So folks, that's what I've got right now. But thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed it, despite the technical lack of aptitude that I'm showing on this one. And I hope to see you in the group. Thanks for watching and thanks for reading, and I'll see you soon.